Section 6.4 is titled Solving Word Problems Using Systems of Equations. What's nice about this section is once you've figured out how to set up the word problem, then it's simple because you know how to solve a system of equations. So there are two types we're going to look at. Two types of word problems are going to be things and total, but the steps are the same. First we want to assign x and y and make sure you write them down so you don't forget. Then we're going to set up our two equations in the system, solve using substitution or elimination, and I'll tell you probably 99.9% of the time you're going to use elimination. And then once we've solved, we want to make sure we answer the question. So we always want to refer back to the original story problem, reread the question, and then make sure we have it answered. So the first type we'll look at are the type of problems that deal with things. So what happens here is we have two different scenarios where we're purchasing a certain amount of two different items and we have to then pay two different prices. So the easiest way is just to look at some examples. So the first example I will read first. 5 pencils and 2 pens cost $2.75. And 5 pens and 2 pencils cost $3.20. Find the price of a pen and a pencil. So the first thing we need to determine is what are the two things we're talking about. And hopefully you recognize that we're talking about pencils and pens. So I've now labeled pencils as my x and pens as my y. So if we were to write an equation, if we go back to the type, notice it's the number you purchase at a certain price of one item plus the number you purchase at a certain price of a second item is going to equal the total price. So the first sentence says that 5 pencils and 2 pens cost $2.75. Now I don't know the price, that's my x and my y. I'm supposed to find the price. So there's our first equation. 5x plus 2y equals 275. The second situation was that 5 pens, be careful here, pens were the y, and 2 pencils cost $3.20. Now we have our system of equations, and we need to solve for x and y so that we can determine the price of a pencil and a pen. So I'm going to multiply the top equation by 2, and I'm going to multiply the bottom equation by a -5. I'm going to eliminate x. Remember, you have an option. You can try to eliminate y if you'd like. You could have done the top equation by the -2 or the bottom equation by +5. Remember, you don't always have to have the negative where I put it, but this is the way I chose to do it. So I need to multiply all the way across. And you'll definitely want a calculator for these since we're dealing with decimals and money. So I have 10x plus 4y equals 275 times 2 is $5.50. On the bottom, I have a -10x minus 25y equals $3.20 times a -5 is -16. And because we're talking about money, you can put the 0 there if you like, but you don't have to. So now I have the system set up for elimination, and I'm eliminating the x. So we have 4 plus a -25y, that's -21y. And I have 550 plus a -16. That's -$10.50. Typically with money, you'll always see me put 2 decimal places there, so I just don't forget that we're dealing with money. Now we need to divide both sides by -21 to solve for y. And we get that y equals -1050 divided by -21 is 50 cents or 0.50. Your calculator is just going to tell you 0.5, but remember we're dealing with money here. So we found the price of y. Remember, y was a pen. Now we need to determine the price of a pencil, which is x. So I'm going to take that 50 cents and I'm going to plug it back in for y of the first equation. just like we did before. So 0.50, and it equals 275. Now I just need to solve the equation for x. 50 cents times 2 is $1. Whoops, that should be a plus sign. 275, I'm going to subtract $1 from both sides. 5x equals $1.75. Divide both sides by 5. So $1.75 divided by 5 is 35 cents. Now, what we want to be careful of is that this is not the answer to the problem. It asks to find the price of a pen and a pencil. So I would expect you to write that a pen costs X amount of money and a pencil costs X amount of money. So remember, pen was Y, pencil was X. So a pencil costs pencil was X, 35 cents. And a pen costs 50 cents. And I know it's going to sound picky, but if you don't have that written, you will get some credit taken off, because I'm not going to search around for which one you labeled X and which one you labeled Y. So that's why I said in the steps on the previous slide that it was important to make sure that you answer the question. So hopefully this one makes sense. We're going to do another example of the exact same type, which is the things type, and then we'll look at the total. So we have the math club spent $135 buying 6 cases of juice and 1 case of bottled water. The science club spent $110 buying 4 cases of juice and 2 cases of bottled water. How much did a case of juice cost? How much did a case of bottled water cost? And oftentimes you can refer to the question in the story problem to determine what are the two things we're talking about. So hopefully you can see that we're talking about a case of juice and a case of bottled water. So I'm going to call the case of juice X, and the case of bottled water is going to be my Y. And we have two different situations. So hopefully you can see that the math club situation is going to be our first equation. The science club's situation will be our second equation. So we need to know how many cases of each did the math club buy and how much did they spend. So 6 cases of juice plus 1 case of bottled water is going to equal $135. You don't have to put the 1 in front of the Y, but you can. The science club then spends how much money? $110, and they buy 4 cases of juice, that's our X, and 2 cases of bottled water. Now, we have our system set up. It's probably going to be easier to do elimination. You could solve one of these for X or Y and try to plug back in, but again, 99.9% of the time, elimination will be the easiest method to use. So I'm going to multiply the top equation by a -2. Take a look at why I did that. I want the Y's to eliminate because 2 is a multiple of 1. So it's simple, I just have to multiply the top equation. So that gives me -12x minus 2y equals, we're going to take 135 times -2 to give us -270. And I'm not going to bother rewriting the second equation since they are still lined up. So the y's eliminate. I get -8x equals -160. Divide both sides by -8, and we get that x equals -160 divided by -8 is 20. And remember what we're talking about again, we are talking about a cost. How much did a case of juice cost? So the case of juice cost $20. But now we need to figure out how much the bottled water cost. So I'm going to go back to the first equation. I'm going to plug the 20 in for x. So we get 6 times 20 plus y equals 135. So it's 120 plus y equals 135. Subtract 120 from both sides. And we get y equals 15, and again we are talking about cost, so it costs $15 for a case of bottled water. I don't know how much shopping you do, but that's a lot of money for water. Typically, I buy a case of the Walmart brand water for about $3 or $4. Okay, but we still need to make sure we answer the question. So a case of juice costs, that was our X, $20. Case of bottled water costs $15. And now we're sure that we've answered the question. We have our variables matching up correctly. And again, that's what I'm checking for, is what's in the box. So now let's look at the other type of problem. The other type of problem is when you know how many of something you buy or you have altogether. So let's say you're talking about two different things, but you know how many you have altogether. But then you also know the price of each one of those items and how much you spent altogether. So using those two equations, then we can still solve the system to find out either how many of each you bought or the price of each. So in example 3, Steve asked a bank teller to cash a $390 check using $20 bills and $50 bills. If the teller gave him a total of 15 bills, how many of each type of bill did Steve receive? So he's got $390 check and he wants $20 bills and $50 bills. She gives him a total of 15 bills. So the question is, what are we talking about? And we can go to the question in the problem to answer that. It says how many of each type of bill. So we're talking about $20 bills. That's going to be my X. And we're talking about $50 bills. That's going to be my Y. And this is the number of bills. Now if we go back, we need to know how many 20s and how many 50s that are going to add up to how many total he got. And it says here he got 15 bills. So that means that however many 20s plus however many 50s should equal 15 bills. Now we need to know, though, using the cost, we know that a $20 bill is worth $20 plus the $50 bill worth $50 should equal a total of $390, since that's how much the check is that he's cashing. So now we have our system. We added the parts together to get the total number of bills, which is 15. Then we used the price of each item to see what the total amount, and set it equal to the total amount the check cost. So here I'm just going to go ahead and multiply the top equation by a negative 20. That'll get my x's to eliminate. So negative 20x minus 20y. Negative 20 times 15 is negative 300. Apparently I don't feel like doing any mental math today. I've been using my calculator for all of this. So we're going to eliminate x. 50y minus 20y, that's 30y. 390 minus 300, or plus a negative 300, that's 90. Divide both sides by 30. And we get that y equals 3. Now remember, we're not talking about money here in our answer. It's not how much did something cost. It's how many 50s and 20s did he receive. So if y represents the number of 50s, and maybe I should put that, number of 20s and number of 50s. So we get y equals 3. Now we're going to plug that back in. The first equation is definitely the simpler of the two. Subtract 3 from both sides, and we get that x equals 12. So how many of each type did Bill receive? Steve. His name is Steve. Steve received 12 $20 bills and 3 $50 bills. And that answers the question, and that's what I'll be looking for when you solve these on worksheets, quizzes, and tests. Let's look at one final example. To use a certain computer database, the charge is $30 per hour during the day. and $10.50 per hour at night. If a research company paid $411 for 28 hours of use, find the number of hours charged at the daytime rate and at the nighttime rate. So the two things we're talking about are daytime rate and nighttime rate. So I'll call the daytime rate X, the nighttime rate Y. Some of you may even like to use specific variables like D and N to help you keep track, but that's fine as well, but I'll probably always use X and Y. So first we know the charge is $30 for the day and $10.50 at night. We know they paid for 11 and they have 28 hours of use altogether. So those are our parts. If we take the number of daytime hours plus the number of nighttime hours, we get 28 hours altogether. But now we need to incorporate the price. It's $30 during the day plus $10.50 at night for a total of $411 paid. So there's your system. If you're not sure how I came up with that, just think about it for a minute. Take a look at where I pulled the numbers from. Reread the sentences if you have to see where I got those two equations from. I'm going to multiply the top by negative 30. So I get negative 30x minus 30y equals 28 times negative 30 is negative 840. My x's will eliminate. 1050 minus 30 is negative 1950 for y. 411 minus 840 is negative 429. Divide both sides by negative 1950. And we get y equals 22. And remember, y represents the number of nighttime hours. So 22 hours were spent during the evening or at night. We're going to use that first equation, plugging in y to solve for x. And some of you probably don't even have to show all of this. You know that if it's 28 hours altogether, 22 of them were at night. That leaves 6 during the day. So the number of hours charged at the daytime rate, 6 hours charged at the daytime rate and 22 hours charged at the nighttime rate. And that answers the question. So you will work on worksheet 6-4. And again, this is a topic that tends to be a little bit tricky, but we only looked at 2 different types of problems. And on the worksheet, I actually have labeled which type is which. So if it says things, you'll refer to examples 1 and 2 from your notes. If it says total, you will refer to examples 3 and 4. Just make sure that tomorrow in class you're giving it your best shot on the worksheet.